Yeah, good morning, everybody. It's KB5 MIQ Big Boy. Thought we'd do a little recap of a video I put up about Christmas time. Um, HKV and myself, and like I said, DLX, we talk a lot and talk a lot about what we're seeing on social media, and we're still seeing lots of questions about ways to communicate during emergencies, especially more so now with the world situation being what it is. Now, I'm not going to discuss anything political. I don't discuss political on ham politics on ham radio. So all we're going to do is talk about different ways to communicate and give people some examples and try to go in a little more in depth than I did that earlier video. A couple instances that I've already had. I think I've covered them both in previous videos. We had a tornado years ago that tore up a town next to us, and I actually was kind of taking a break from the hobby, and I didn't have a radio in my truck. And that instant made me put a radio back in the vehicle because you couldn't make a cell phone call. The cell phones were saturated. Of course, this was like 99, and cell phones aren't what they are now, but still, you could not make a cell phone call. And then I covered in another video about actually doing emergency communications during a major power outage during an ice storm. So that's one of the great things why we do amateur radio. But seeing all kinds of requests for information and people are kind of wanting it instantly. So I'm going to recap some things, hopefully go in a little more detail. First thing, if you're not an amateur radio operator or don't have any way to transmit, but you need a way to receive information, shortwave radio scanners or receivers are a good way to do it. Now, there's no official definition of the band, but it includes all high frequency bands from 3 to 30 megahertz. And that's above the medium frequency band to the bottom of the VHF band. And the price is the limit. The price is how much you want to spend on one of these things. They don't require expensive antenna. However, if you're a serious shortwave listener and your receiver you buy has the capability to get a outside antenna, I strongly recommend you put a long wire on it. Y'all excuse me 1 second. Okay, I'm back. Uh, Shortwave receivers will give you a world of information. You can listen to broadcasts from all over the world. And like I was saying, if you get one that has a capability of an external antenna, all it takes is just run a long piece of wire. It doesn't take a special antenna. The longer the piece of wire you run up in the air and the higher you get it is better. It'll always pick up better. First, before I got a my first ham ticket, I borrowed an old Hammerlin low band receiver from HKV. Took a piece of 12 or 14 gauge electrical THHM wire and run about 120 foot of it up a tree. Hooked it to the back of it. Man, listen to everything. So that's an option. So let me go to another option. Hold on, I need to get something ready for this for an example. Okay, everybody, I'm back. Excuse me, I'm a kind of unorganized YouTuber. We're going to talk about FRS, Family Radio Service. Family Radio Service is an improved walkie-talkie system authorized in the United States since 1996. Personal radio service uses channelized frequencies from 462 to 467 megahertz in the UHF band. It does not suffer the interference effects on Citizens band at 28, 27 megahertz or the 49 megahertz band used by cordless phones, toys, etc. And now baby monitors. FRS is FM mode only, and it's a very short range type deal. This is your typical FRS radio. I call them the deer hunting radios. Actually, that's what I use this pair of radios for. That's just a Motorola, runs on 3 AA batteries, fixed channel radio, all it is. All right, now these radios cannot be used with a detachable antenna. All equipment at FRS must be type accepted according to the FCC regulations. They cannot exceed a power output of 2 watts, and they originally started out with a half a watt. And you cannot have a detachable antenna. You cannot authorize operate at any of the other frequencies. These are a very short range radio. I mean, these come out of the box saying they were 2-mile radios. and you get about a half a mile out of them. So if you need something to communicate at a very short range with no license requirement, there's no license required on these. It's real simple to operate, and you're at a short range distance. And factually, some of these come with rechargeable batteries in them. That might be what you need to do. All right, so let's go to. But remember, these are very short range radios, and we're going to talk about walkie-talkie range here in a minute. But I'm going to go to GMRS right now. Let me go with that bookmark. Y'all bear with me. Trying to get to where I can do these a little better. General Mobile Radio Service is a land mobile FM UHF service designed for short distance two-way communications, authorized under Part 95 of the 40 of something U.S. Service Code, something like that. It requires a license in the United States, but some GRMS compatible equipment can be used license free in Canada. The GMRS license issued for a period of 10 years by the FCC, just like a ham license. But they're an issue. You have to earn a ham license. I think these you just apply for them and get them. And they're typically handheld radios, much like family radio service. They share a frequency band with FRS and the UHF frequency band. But these are normally commercial UHF radios. Okay. GMRS licensees are also allowed to establish repeaters to extend their communication range. GMRS repeaters are permitted to be linked with other GMRS repeaters, but are not authorized to be connected to public telephone network, which would be like through a phone patch. Any individual in the United States who's at least 18 years of age and not a representative of a foreign government may apply for a GMRS license by completing the application form either on paper or online through the FCC's Universal Licensing System. No exam is required. The GMRS license issued for a 10-year term, and this is showing the fee was $70, but everybody knows they just cut it in half and put the other half on ham radio operators. GMRS license extends to immediate family members, allowing them to use the system. And generally allowed to communicate with FRS systems on those frequencies that are shared between the two services. GMRS individual licenses do not extend to employees. Okay. Range. Okay, one other thing. In any case, GMRS station must be identified by a transmission of its FCC assigned call sign at the end of every transmission or series of transmissions, or at least once every 15 minutes. Okay. As with UHF radios, reliable range is considered to be line of sight. Distance of the radio rise can be estimated based on antenna height. Like I said, depending on where you're at, and we're going to talk more about talkie range in a minute. But that's mainly GMRS. The radios are not that expensive. So let's go to my next subject matter for this type of stuff. Where's my bookmarks? All right. Good old CB radios. Citizens Band Radio, known as CB radio, is a land mobile radio system allowing short distance person-to-person bidirectional voice communication using two-way radios on 40 channels near 27 megahertz, 11 meters, in the high frequency shortwave area of radio. Like you people with shortwave receivers can listen to CBs real easily. Citizens Band is distinct from other personal radio service allocations such as FERS, GMRS, and ham radio. In many countries, CB operation doesn't require a license, unlike ham radio, amateur radio. It may be used for business or personal communications. Transmitter power is limited to 4 watts in the US and Europe, and if you have a sideband rig, it's 12 watts PEP power, which is peak envelope power on your voice peaks. And we'll talk more about that later. They have a range of 3 to 20 miles, depending upon line of sight, antenna height, things like that. History, I thought it come out. There was some in 48. I thought it really got to be more popular in the 60s. I know in the 70s it really took off. And service was in the 60s. The service was popular among small business owners, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, truck drivers, and radio hobbyists. And 70s oil crisis hit. CBs went crazy. This everything under the sun. CBs are inexpensive. They don't require a license now. Uh, and actually, with the sunspot cycle coming up, as long as you're not exceeding the power, you're allowed to talk skip on them, which is long distance through ionosphere through skywave communication. That was unusual because it used to be illegal to do that. 40 channels, they're broke down in separate whatever band plan CBs use. I don't think there's much enforcement on that. They lost a lot of their appeal due to mobile phones. Actually, I'm playing with a CB in my ham shack right now, so ham radio operators don't kill me, but I kind of like fooling with them on occasion. They're a good way to communicate. They're inexpensive. 40 channel AM CB radio, Walmart's about $50. So there's a good, might be an option there for people who don't want to go into the ham license. But let's go into amateur radio. Amateur radio, known as ham radio, is the use of radio frequency spectrum for the purpose of non-commercial exchange of messages, wireless experimentation, self-training, private recreation, radio sport contesting, and emergency communications. The term amateur is used to specify a duly assigned person interested in radioelectric practice with a purely personal aim without business interest, either monetary or similar reward, and to differentiate it from commercial broadcasting, public safety, fire, professional two-way, so on. Okay, you have a whole spectrum of radio you can use in ham. What we've talked about before, FRS, GMRS, and CB, you're only limited to one little section of a band. Okay? With amateur radio, you have an entire spectrum of radio that you can use. There's a band plan that runs from microwave frequencies all the way down to super low band frequencies, even lower than the 160 meter band on the HF side of things. Amateur radios use the bands that are allocated throughout the spectrum of radio. And when you think of the spectrum of radio, look at it like a piece of pie. Like you got a whole big half of a pie here, and each slice is designated. And as you come up in the spectrum from lowest part to highest part, the antennas get shorter, and there'll be a section of spectrum there, say, on the 10 meter band is 28.0 to 29.9. Everything in that little section of the band is set aside for amateur radio. 27 megahertz below it is set as part of that is set aside for citizens band, and commercial that falls in there. So it's just the spectrum of radio is cut up into pie sections that everybody gets a little bit of. Okay, that's the best way I can know to explain it. ARRL is like the NRA for ham radio. They're the main body we have representing us. You have, licensing. When you get into ham radio, now they've got it down to 3 licenses: technician, general, amateur, extra. And as you go up in license, you get more privileges. Like the technician class, what everybody enters at now is all your VHF, UHF privileges, all modes. Anything AM, FM, single side band, any digital mode from VHF, UHF, and above you use. You've got some CW Morse code privileges in the low bands, and you actually have some single side band voice privileges in the 10 meter band from 28.3 to 28.5, and you're limited to 100 watts PEP power. Can't exceed that as a novice or technician. I'm thinking old novice. But you have to pass a test that's given by volunteer examiners in order to get your license. They just don't give these licenses out. So there's some knowledge you have to gain, and it gets more in depth for each class of license. But the thing about it is this: every radio I've talked about before now have to be FCC type accepted. You can't work on it. You can't modify it. You can't do anything to it but use it. anything that's set aside in the amateur radio classification is not FCC type accepted. You can build your own radios. You can, if you're good enough, you can work on your own radio. Build your own antennas. I do that. HKV and DLX now do that. You know, there's the spectrum is endless on what you can do with this hobby. You have access to all kinds of digital modes that are like packet, which is that's an old digital mode. I think more of them now are into this FT8, FT4, where your computer is actually doing the radio talking. I'm not familiar with the current digital mode, so I'm not the one to ask on that. I'm an old single sideband voice operator. That's what I enjoy about the hobby, and that's the part of it I like. But it's not for everybody. I like to see people get their ham license. It gives them some options on communicating in an emergency. But again, you're going to run into problems. It's a more expensive hobby to get into. All right. I think I've covered that about as well as I can. Let's talk about one other subject right quick. All right. Understanding walkie-talkies. And this is one of the most misleading things you get. It's like this talkie here talks about it's a 2-mile range talkie. Yeah, it'll be a 2-mile range talkie if you're both in a hot air balloon in the air 2 miles from one another with nothing in between you. It'll probably go 2 miles, but that's it. If the walkie-talkies, the biggest detriment to their range is the terrain you're in. Okay. All right. Now, why can I talk on a walkie-talkie not over a mile from talkie to talkie, but how can I hit a repeater that's 15 miles away in the same spot? Okay, here's the difference. The repeater antenna is more than likely in excess of 100 feet in the air. Probably most of them are at least 300 feet in the air. Most of them are on commercial radio towers. So you end up with this antenna way up here in the air with a line of sight better down to you over 10 miles away. It goes over all the terrain, which makes it be able to access a repeater. And that's what a repeater is there for, to extend the range of talkies and mobile radios. Another thing get people asked a lot, and I'm going to show y'all what everybody's scourge or everybody talks about is the Baofungs. All right. This is the factory antenna on a Baofung. You got to remember, this rubber duck has got wire coiled in it to make this radio think it's seeing a full-length antenna. It works fine under most conditions. But I live kind of out in a fringe area from everything. So I purchased a longer antenna, which is still going to have a coil of wire in it, making it seeing a full quarter wave antenna, but it's got more antenna than coil of wire, which will help it receive and transmit better. And that's an option you should look at, is upgrading the antenna on a talkie. I had this problem in the Air Force. We used Motorola Sabre radios in the UHF band. Everybody had them when they first had a little old bitty duck about that big on them. Well, everybody liked them because they could clip them on their belt and try to talk with them on their belt. And everybody had all kinds of problems making communications work with them. And I tried to explain to everybody, you can't do that. You've got to get the thing up, especially with that small antenna, because that's just a coil of wire making that radio think it's seeing a full quarter wave antenna. I actually purchased from Motorola some longer rubber ducks that were not quite a quarter wave, but they were better for that radio, and it did improve them. So that's one thing with talkies you have to remember. You're limited no matter what you're using. Family radio service, GMRS, or ham radio talkies. You're strictly limited by terrain and line of sight. Okay, well, I hope this video explained a few things to people. If you've got any questions, my call sign is KB5MIQ. My email's on my QRZ page. Shoot me an email. I've had a couple of people do that already. Glad to help them any way I can. Leave me a comment, and I'll try to answer your question through a comment. If you send me an email, please put your call sign in the subject matter so it'll catch my eye better, because I get a lot of junk email. Anyway, I appreciate everybody who subscribed to the channel. I hit 140 subscribers for a new ham channel. We're trying to do this because we enjoy supporting the hobby. Thanks again for everybody watching. It's KB5MIQ Big Boy 73.